Today on the Perception and Action podcast, a little post-game analysis of my discussion and debate with Mike Ashford about ecological versus information processing-based approaches to decision-making in sports. So it's time for a call to action. Hi, this is Rob Gray from Arizona State University. I've been on a now over 25-year journey as a researcher, professor, and high-performance consultant to understand how we acquire and adapt our perceptual motor skills. Welcome to the Perception and Action podcast, where I discuss how psychological research can be applied to improving performance, accelerating skill acquisition, and designing technologies. Before we get to today's topic, I want to tell you about my new book. Yes, I've written a new book on skill acquisition called How We Learn to Move, a Revolution in the Way We Coach and Practice Sports Skills. It covers the ecological approach to skill from different angles, including practice design, the CLA, coaching, youth sports, designing technology, injury prevention, and using analytics. So I hope you will consider giving it a read. You can find the book on Amazon or by going to perceptionaction.com/book. Now on to the show. So the main purpose of today's episode is to point you to another podcast, in case you haven't heard it yet. Recently, I was invited by Dan Cottrell to be a guest on his Rugby Coach Weekly podcast. The main goal of it was for me to have an open discussion and debate with Mike Ashford about ecological versus information processing / mental model-based approaches to decision-making in sports. You can find a link to the episode in the show notes or just go to rugbycoachweekly.net. I will get into a little post-game analysis of my reflections about it in a second, but first a little background to how it came about. So, back in episode 386, I reviewed an article published by Mike and a couple of his colleagues looking at decision-making. The main points the authors made in it was that they felt that both research and coaching needs to take an integrative approach where we combine direct and indirect approaches to skilled performance. I, of course, disagreed with this and countered that it's impossible and illogical, and that the paper has a few misunderstandings about direct perception, in particular confounding it with online control, an issue which I discussed back in episode 382. But anyways, Mike responded to this on Twitter, thanking me for reviewing his paper and saying that he disagreed with my thoughts without getting into why, really. As it too often does, this led to a bunch of uncivil and unproductive activity on Twitter by other people, instead of a good discussion about our differing viewpoints. So the idea of having a podcast debate was born. Dan was gracious enough to invite us on his podcast. For me, the content of the discussion is secondary to the fact that we did this and how it was done. Yes, we both got very passionate about our views, but our discussion was civil and thoughtful throughout. I really had a lot of fun doing it. It was completely different to the feeling I have about most of the Twitter threads I've been involved in, and I know a lot of people don't really like. It really reminded me of the way it used to be back in the old days. Throughout my career, I've been in arguments and heated debates about motor control and skill acquisition all the time, but these happen at conferences at the end of sessions over a beer face-to-face. I really hope that there can be more virtual discussions like this to recreate this type of discussion, as I think it's way more productive. Now to the actual content. First of all, I would like to thank Mike for being such a great discussant. I think both of us made the points we wanted to. Mike's main tack seemed to be to go into deep detail about particular plays in rugby, arguing that they have a logic and structure that is sufficiently complex that can only be explained by shared mental models. My main counterpoint was that such logic and structure exist throughout our environment, and it was the very reason Gibson felt that perception could be direct. The information is out there and it's specific to the event, so it doesn't need processing or interpretation. It would be a lack of detail or logic or a lot of ambiguity that would necessitate the need for mental models, not the reverse. I also tried to emphasize that there's no proof that mental models exist. They are an assumption based on post-perception recollections by athletes, and that a lot of the behavior we see on teams that is assumed to be the result of shared mental models can be equally well explained by shared affordances. The final point I will make is, again, I find this really useful. I find when people have points of contention with me or are not kind of getting the points I'm trying to make, that gives me an agenda for future research and future study, right? We need to explain those things better. We need to do research to clarify them. So I think engaging and understanding someone else's viewpoint, even if it's very different from yours, can be very, very useful. And I got a lot of that out of this discussion. But anyways, I'll leave it up to you to listen to the rest. Okay, that's it for today's episode. Remember, you can contact me at robgray@asu.edu or follow me on Twitter at ShakyWeights. To find out more about the podcast, please check out perceptionaction.com. Finally, to support the podcast and receive bonus materials, including written transcripts, please head over to patreon.com/perceptionaction. This is Rob Gray from ASU. Cheers for now, and keep 'em coupled.